It was a chilly autumn afternoon when Lauren Miller stood by the kitchen window, watching the leaves spiral to the ground. The light filtered through the fading foliage, casting dappled shadows across the house's cozy interior. Her home, once a sanctuary, felt distant and cold these days. She couldn't pinpoint exactly when it had begun, but something had changed. Something dark lingered beneath the surface of their otherwise perfect family life. Lauren and her husband, David, had been married for nearly a decade. Their marriage had always been solid, at least on the surface. They had the picture-perfect suburban life, a charming two-story house in an affluent neighborhood, two kids who kept them busy, and a live-in nanny to help manage the chaos. Angela, the nanny, had become part of their daily routine, a soft-spoken, reliable young woman in her mid-20s who had seemed like a godsend when she came into their lives a year ago. But lately, Lauren's sixth sense had been tingling. Something was off. David had been more distant, staying late at work more often than usual. The tenderness that had once defined their relationship had slowly eroded, replaced by awkward silences and half-hearted smiles. And Angela, well, there was something different about her too. Something more subtle. Lauren couldn't quite put her finger on it, but her gut told her there was more beneath the surface. One evening, after David left the house for yet another business meeting, Lauren noticed Angela staring off into the distance as she washed dishes. Her hands moved mechanically, and her face held an expression Lauren hadn't seen before. Guilt? Sadness? Lauren couldn't be sure, but it gnawed at her. "Angela?" Lauren asked, her voice hesitant but curious. Angela jumped slightly, turning to face Lauren with a nervous smile. "Yes, Mrs. Miller?" Lauren eyed her for a moment, unsure of how to phrase the question bubbling up inside. "You've been with us for a while now, and I just wanted to check in. Is everything okay?" Angela's eyes flickered, the briefest moment of hesitation before she responded. "Of course, Mrs. Miller. Everything's fine. Just a little tired, I guess." Lauren forced a smile, but the uneasy feeling inside her only grew. Something wasn't right. Later that night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling next to David's motionless form, she decided to start paying more attention. The next few days passed with little to no event, but Lauren made a point of observing David and Angela more closely. She noticed small things, lingering glance between them that lasted just a second too long, a fleeting smile that passed over David's lips when Angela entered the room. These weren't huge red flags, but they were enough to make her instincts scream that something was wrong. One afternoon, after dropping the kids off at school, Lauren returned home early and found the house eerily quiet. David had told her he was working from home that day, but as she walked through the front door, she heard muffled voices upstairs. The sound of David's voice mixed with Angela's. Soft laughter drifted down the staircase. Her stomach tightened, and she felt the familiar burn of suspicion flare up in her chest. Quietly, she made her way up the stairs, careful not to make a sound. As she reached the landing, she could hear their conversation more clearly now, coming from the master bedroom. Lauren's heart pounded in her ears. What if she finds out? Angela's voice was hushed, but Lauren heard the edge of anxiety in her tone. "She won't," David reassured her. "We just have to be careful." Lauren's breath caught in her throat, and for a split second, she felt as if the world had stopped spinning. She felt dizzy, lightheaded, her worst fears confirmed in that single moment. She wanted to burst through the door, to scream, to confront them, but her body wouldn't move. Instead, she backed away silently, retreating down the stairs with trembling hands and a racing heart. For the next few days, Lauren didn't say a word. She felt paralyzed, trapped in her own home, constantly thinking of David's betrayal. Every smile, every touch, Every word from him now felt like a lie. She found herself scrutinizing every interaction between him and Angela, imagining scenarios that broke her heart over and over again. One evening, as she sat at the dinner table with David and Angela, she couldn't take it anymore. The air felt thick with unspoken words, and the tension was unbearable. Lauren set down her fork, her hand trembling slightly. "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. David and Angela both froze. David blinked at her, his eyes wide with surprise, but Angela's face instantly drained of color. Lauren stared straight at David, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know about the two of you." The silence that followed was deafening. David opened his mouth, but no words came out. Angela looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Lauren's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for David to say something, anything, but he just sat there, his face a mask of guilt and fear. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse. "Lauren, I didn't want you to find out like this." Her anger exploded, fueled by weeks of suspicion, heartbreak, and sleepless nights. "How could you do this to me? To our family?" she demanded, her voice shaking with rage. "You lied to me, David. You've been lying to me for who knows how long." David put his hands up, trying to calm her. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't mean for it to go this far, I swear." "But it did." Lauren's voice cracked as tears streamed down her face. "And you let it happen. How could you betray me like this? We have kids, David. We built a life together." Angela, who had been sitting quietly, finally spoke up, her voice soft but full of regret. "Mrs. Miller, Don't you dare." Lauren cut her off, glaring at the younger woman with a fury she hadn't known she possessed. "Don't you dare." Blinked at her, his eyes wide with surprise, but Angela's face instantly drained of color. Lauren stared straight at David, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know about the two of you." The silence that followed was deafening. David opened his mouth, but no words came out. Angela looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Lauren's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for David to say something, anything, but he just sat there, his face a mask of guilt and fear. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse. "Lauren, I didn't want you to find out like this." Her anger exploded, fueled by weeks of suspicion, heartbreak, and sleepless nights. "How could you do this to me? To our family?" she demanded, her voice shaking with rage. "You lied to me, David. You've been lying to me for who knows how long." David put his hands up, trying to calm her. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't mean for it to go this far, I swear." "But it did." Lauren's voice cracked as tears streamed down her face. "And you let it happen. How could you betray me like this? We have kids, David. We built a life together." Angela, who had been sitting quietly, finally spoke up, her voice soft but full of regret. "Mrs. Miller, Don't you dare." Lauren cut her off, glaring at the younger woman with a fury she hadn't known she possessed. "Don't you dare speak to me right now." Angela lowered her head, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. The weight of the situation settled over the room, suffocating them all. David tried again, his voice pleading. "Lauren, I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you. Please, we can work through this." Lauren shook her head, her chest tightening with every word. "How can you say that? You don't do this to someone you love, David. You don't destroy everything we built." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. For a long moment, none of them moved. Lauren felt her world shattering around her, every piece of her life crumbling into dust. The man she thought she knew, the man she had trusted with her heart, had betrayed her in the worst way imaginable. After what felt like an eternity, Lauren stood up, her legs unsteady. She glanced at David one last time, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't do this anymore." She turned and left the room, leaving David and Angela behind in stunned silence. She walked out of the house, out into the cold night air, her heart broken but resolute. There was no going back from this. The trust that had once held their family together was gone, shattered beyond repair. For days, Lauren kept her distance, staying with a friend while she figured out what to do next. The children were confused, sensing the tension, but too young to fully understand. David called and texted constantly, begging for forgiveness, but Lauren couldn't bring herself to respond. The pain was too raw, too deep. Eventually, she met with a divorce attorney, knowing that there was no salvaging her marriage. The betrayal had cut too deep, and even though a part of her still loved David, she knew she could never trust him again. The life they had built together was over, and now she had to start over, for herself and for her children. Lauren returned to the house one final time to pack up her things. David wasn't there. He had moved out temporarily. While they sorted through the logistics, the house was eerily quiet, the memories of their life together haunting every corner. As she walked through the rooms, she felt a strange sense of closure. The pain was still there, but it was duller now, less suffocating. She had survived the worst of it, and now she could begin to heal. In the end, betrayal had torn their family apart, but Lauren knew she had the strength to move forward. She would rebuild her life, piece by piece, and though the scars would remain, she would not let them define her. The road ahead would be difficult, but it was hers to walk, and for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Lauren knew that she was leaving behind more than just a. As she closed the door behind her and stepped out into the crisp autumn air, Lauren knew that she was leaving behind more than just a house. She was leaving behind the pain, the lies, and the betrayal, and in their place, she was reclaiming her future.